Hello, Patriots. Welcome to Doug's Democracy Den. Here in the Den, we like to talk about American government, politics, and current events. To honor our country and our flag, every time we meet in the Den, we say the Pledge of Allegiance. Feel free to join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Today in the Den, we're continuing our series on Understanding the U.S. Constitution. This is episode 2 in that series. Today we're going to start analyzing the Constitution itself with Article 1. As you all know, there are 3 branches of government. And at the federal level, those 3 branches are established by the first 3 articles of the Constitution, Articles 1, 2, and 3. We're focusing on Article 1 today, and Article 1 establishes the branch that you know as Congress. Now, Congress gets a lot of negative publicity, and much of it is rightly so. Congress is generally viewed in popularity polls as being the least favored institution in our government, in our country. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Some of them earned, some not. As I always tell my classes, there's a couple of definitions you have to keep in mind when talking about Congress. First of all, the word Congress is the opposite of the word progress. So that is always a problem. And second, what does Congress deal with? Congress deals in politics. And look at the word politics. You got poly, which means many, and you have ticks, which means blood-sucking animals. So politics is really all about many blood-sucking animals trying to get ahead. So that's what Congress is dealing with. So how is Congress designed? What you know as Congress is designed in 2 sections. One section is the U.S. House of Representatives. The other section is the U.S. Senate. They're both designed to work independently and yet ultimately reach agreement in the end on something called legislation. Legislation is the coin of the realm in Congress. That's their job, to make laws. How is the U.S. House of Representatives designed? Well, the founders designed it to be the people's house. It's supposed to be the part of the federal government which is closest to the people and keeps their hand on the pulse of the people. How do they do that? Because members of the U.S. House of Representatives are elected to 2-year terms. That means they are theoretically supposed to be in constant contact with their constituents and about what their constituents want. They're elected for 2-year terms. Contrast that with the U.S. Senate. The U.S. Senate is elected for 6-year terms. They are supposed to be a more deliberative body and take a longer-term view of policy. They're called the world's greatest deliberative body. Some people interpret that to mean they never do anything and they do it slowly. So the U.S. House and U.S. Senate combined are called Congress. Let's talk about how you properly address them. A person who is elected to the U.S. Senate is called senator, and that's the only title. In the U.S. House of Representatives, it's a little more murky. You call a person elected to the U.S. House of Representatives properly Representative whoever, Representative Smith, Representative Jones, but also you can call people elected to the U.S. House of Representatives a congressman. So you can call them Congressman Smith or Congressman Jones. Both are used for House members, but only senator is ever used for a senator. Now, one other thing which gets tricky is that when you're talking about the U.S. House, you're talking about that body. Talking about the U.S. Senate, you're talking about that body. When you say Congress, you're talking about both of them together. Congress means both of them together. Now, what is it that they do and why makes them important? They're in Article 1 because the founders put them in Article 1 and designed the Congress to be the most powerful branch of the government. I know that is contrary to what many of you think or have been taught, so let's address the other phrases. there's a phrase called checks and balances, and that is very true and is always at play. There's a system of checks and balances between the three branches, between the legislative, which is Congress, the executive, which is the president, and the judicial, which is the courts. There is a system of checks and balances. What does that mean in practical speak? What that means is each branch has ways of ruining the other guy's day, making them unhappy, slowing them down. That's what checks and balances really amounts to at the federal level. There's also a phrase called co-equal branches of government, and in the general sense, the three are co-equal branches, meaning that they each have to be doing their job and doing it properly for the federal government to function properly. So they have to co-equally exist and co-equally work. Think of it as a three-legged stool. The stool works just fine when it has all three legs, but if you pull off one leg and that leg isn't working properly, the stool topples over. And some people say that happens in the federal government a lot. Now, they are co-equal, and there is a system of checks and balances, but the founders intentionally made Congress, in Article 1, the most powerful of the three. And they gave them three special powers which make that so. I call them the three superpowers of Congress. Here we go. What is it that makes Congress most powerful among the three? By design of the founders. Number one, the power to tax. Congress and Congress alone can levy taxes on you. The president, whatever president, Democrat or Republican, can beg for tax cuts or tax increases all day, all night until they're blue in the face. Nothing happens until Congress votes for it. Congress and Congress alone can raise your taxes or lower your taxes, and then also spend, and they're very good at the spend part. So Congress is responsible for tax and spend, not any other branch. Congress is. So when budget deficits are increasing or budget cuts are happening, presidents frequently give much too much credit, or much too much blame. It's because Congress is doing it and voting for it. Next, what's the next thing that makes Congress most powerful? Congress and Congress alone can declare war. Let me say that again. Congress and Congress alone can declare war. Presidents are always focused on in terms of war-like attitude and making war, but no war is officially declared until Congress does it. Which leads to an interesting trivia question, which I will answer at the end of this episode. When was the last time your U.S. Congress officially declared war? Next, the third superpower of Congress. You may have heard about something called impeachment. Congress and Congress alone wields the power of impeachment, and it has to be understood what impeachment actually is and who can be impeached. At the federal level, the office of the president can be impeached, the vice president can be impeached. All members of Congress can be impeached, and all federal judges can be impeached. What does that mean? That means allegations of wrongdoing are brought against that office holder. And if there's enough evidence gathered, which Congress then feels is adequate, they can vote to kick that person out of the job they've been elected to. So what impeachment really is Congress saying this person has acted in such an unethical or immoral way that we need to kick them out of their office they were elected to, thereby overturning the results of an election. That's very powerful and very serious. Congress has the power to impeach anybody at the federal level, to literally overturn the results of an election if they feel the weight of evidence shows immoral and unethical activity not fitting the office. The phrase impeachment, though, can be misleading because impeachment isn't the full thing. Impeachment in their process simply means that some charges, some allegations have been brought. That's not the end of the process, that's the beginning of the process. You can analogize it to the normal legal system that you and I are subject to. When you are charged with a crime, you are issued something called an indictment. By being indicted, that simply means you've been charged. That doesn't mean you've been convicted. Same with impeachment. When impeachment charges are leveled, that means you've been charged. That doesn't mean you've been convicted. They then have to have a trial. They then have to reach a finding. So impeachment is the beginning of the impeachment process. The ultimate penalty in the impeachment process, at the end of the process, if they find you guilty of whatever, if Congress finds the office holder guilty, the ultimate penalty is removal from office. And many federal judges have been removed from office. Many members of Congress have been removed from office. No president has ever been removed from office through the impeachment process. So the three superpowers that Congress have that make them most powerful: the power to tax and spend, the power to declare war, and the power to impeach. Now, how do they structure themselves? In the U.S. House of Representatives, you may have heard of somebody called the Speaker of the House. The Speaker of the House is the person who is in control, in charge, in the House of Representatives. They are the boss, period, end of sentence. If the Speaker wants some legislation to get through in the House of Representatives, they can arrange it to happen. If there's some legislation they don't want to get through, they can arrange it to not get through. How does that person become Speaker, the most powerful person in the House of Representatives? Well, what is interesting about that is the founders put in an interesting item related to the Speaker of the House. The Speaker of the House does not need to be an elected member of the House of Representatives. Anybody can be nominated to be Speaker of the House. And if the House votes for them, they become Speaker. Anybody in the country can be nominated to be Speaker of the House. However, because of the political element, both major political parties, Democrats and Republicans, strive very hard to be the majority in the House. What does that mean? That means after an election, when they all get together in January to organize themselves, you count up how many Democrats there are, how many Republicans there are. Whoever has the most, they are the majority. And then what happens? The Democrats will nominate somebody to be Speaker, the Republicans will nominate somebody to be Speaker. Guess who wins? The one coming from the side with the most people. So being in the majority guarantees you having the Speaker. It also guarantees another thing. In the House of Representatives, there are 20-some committees that do all the actual work of legislating. And the majority party gets to appoint the chairman of each committee and gets to have a majority of the members on the committee. So if a Democrat is in charge, that means all the committees will be chaired by Democrats, and Democrats will always have a numerical superiority on each subcommittee and committee. Then you transfer it over. If the Republicans win control, the Republican Speaker will appoint all Republicans as committee chairman, and they'll appoint numerical advantages on all committees to Republicans. That's how it swaps. Being in the majority in the House is crucial to getting your way and getting your legislation passed. And that's what the Speaker of the House indicates, what party is in control. Go over to the Senate. The Senate does the same thing in terms of majority-minority, but they don't call their person the Speaker of the House. In the Senate, the leader is simply called the Majority Leader. And the Majority Leader will be from the party whoever is bigger, and they are in control of the Senate. That's how they structure themselves. One other element to being in Congress is an age requirement that you may or may not have been aware of. There are age requirements for office holding in Congress. In the U.S. House of Representatives, you have to be at least 25 years old to serve in the U.S. House of Representatives. In the U.S. Senate, you have to be at least 30 years old to serve in the U.S. Senate. So, Article 1 lays out Congress. Article 1 lays out the powers which make Congress constitutionally more powerful than the other two. Article 1 lays out the power to tax, the power to declare war, and the power to impeach. That lays out the basic structure of Congress and their superpowers. There's one other element related to Congress, though. If you dive into Article 1, go to Article 1, Section 8. Article 1, Section 8. The founders laid out a specific list of things they wanted Congress to be responsible for. And that list only has about 17 items on it. It's a very narrow list. The founders wanted the federal government and Congress to be responsible for very limited amounts of things. And that list is laid out in Article 1, Section 8. Anything that Congress is into that is not on that list has been added by Congress since the founders created Congress. And they have done that quite a bit. Some of it reasonable, some of it questionable. And we will look at that at a later time. Now, their power to declare war. When was the last time the U.S. Congress declared war? Well, the date was December 8, 1941, the day after Pearl Harbor. That is the last time your U.S. Congress declared war. So for all of you who have been in the military, who have had parents in the military, and you've been overseas and you've been in wars, you have never fought in a declared war. Probably the most recent generation for you was your grandparents, who fought in an actual declared war. The last one was World War II. That's the last time Congress actually exercised their actual constitutional duty to declare war. Thanks for joining the Den. We'll see you next time for Episode 3, Article 2.